Hello everybody, I am here with Finn Plekkenpol in order to celebrate International Mother Language Day. Hello Finn, welcome.
Hi, Soraya. Lovely to be here. Thank you.
Thank you for meeting us. And could you tell us about your language story? What languages do you speak and why?
I was born in the Netherlands, but I have an Irish mother and a Dutch father. So I was raised bilingually in the Netherlands, in both Dutch and English. So I lived in the Netherlands until I finished secondary school, so until I was 18. I think the Netherlands are quite famous that the Dutch are quite a multilingual people as a whole. There's a lot of language learning in the school curriculum, but even there, I would speak a lot of English to my mum at home. She'd make sure when me and my sister were kids that we'd have English language storybooks and in general things to expose us to sort of natively spoken English so that we could visit our family in Ireland. When I finished school, I eventually went to study in Ireland to also kind of get to know the Irish side of my family a bit better, experience what life with this other part of my heritage was like. And I loved living in Ireland. So I think it's 12 years on now. I've mostly been living in Ireland since. I work for the Irish Department of Foreign Affairs now. And that's also an area where languages have really come in handy. So I'm a very enthusiastic linguist. I speak 7 languages at the moment, most of which I started learning in school and then a few others in university and through general learning on my own afterwards. So I, on top of Dutch and English, which I hopefully still speak both with native fluency, I try my best to keep them at a high level. Obviously I use English every day now. I do make a lot of effort to keep my Dutch up. I also speak French, German and Spanish, which I'm confidently fluent in them, and then Portuguese and Russian as well.
Wow, very impressive. So certainly growing up bilingual ignited something in you with languages. Do you think that's the reason?
I've thought about this a lot as well, because of course when you're a child, you grow up and you don't really think much about it, and in the end, as you get older, you kind of realize that not everyone lives like this, and you know 2 words for most things, and slowly the consciousness kind of grows in you. I think that you have these 2 different sets of vocabularies and ways of talking about things. And I've always thought, and this is totally unscientific, but I think that the big benefit of being raised bilingually is that it sort of, from the moment you're born, it sort of installs in your brain this ability to switch. I think they call it code switching, to switch between different languages. And I think once you have that mechanism kind of nice and fluid and well oiled in your head, there's no reason why I think you that stops with 2 languages. I think once you know that there's different ways of expressing things and you can switch in between those 2, I think it makes it a lot easier to translate that into other languages as well. So that's my own little unscientific theory, but I think it's been a huge benefit to me, and I would definitely encourage everyone who has the opportunity to do it to try it. It's a bit hard, but I think the benefits that you get from it as a child are immeasurable later on when you get older.
And what was it like growing up Dutch and Irish?
Yeah, so I think I'm quite unusual in that I've really a lot of people don't really get the opportunity to really fully experience both cultures in the way I did, in that I really lived in the Netherlands for my full childhood, and then had a very intense experience of getting to my obviously, and everyone's college years in university are it's quite an intense formative period, which I spent in Ireland, and since then I've mostly been in Ireland. So I feel I've managed to embrace sort of both cultures in full. And when I grew up, I felt Dutch with sort of a little asterisk at the end. There was Dutch, but there's a backstory. There's a footnote of. And we noted in that we celebrate Christmas a bit more than my classmates. I'd sometimes have different words for things. There were certain things that I only knew how to say in English, just things that had organically grown in my family. But overall, I didn't really think about it a lot until the moment came that I wanted to study abroad, when I started coming towards the end of secondary school. And that's when I think that really opened up this whole world to me of like, oh, there's another place that I can like try and fit in and get to know. And I've loved that. And I've actually noticed now, especially now that I work in a very international environment in foreign affairs, that it really gives you that extra perspective. And it can sometimes be a little difficult because obviously pretty much everyone at work grew up in Ireland. So sometimes I don't always have the same frames of references of things from long ago. But I find it such a richness that, you really feel like you can contribute something and you have this whole different perspective on things from having lived in a different place.
I'm wondering, growing up, what was the dynamic in your house? What was your family language? Did you speak Dutch altogether, or how did that work?
So I've heard in the past that apparently if you're raising a kid bilingually, the common advice is that you should very strictly divide languages into different scenarios. We did none of that. We were an absolute mess. And we still sort of at home have this sort of patois going on where mostly our family language was Dutch because that's where we lived. And, I went to school in Dutch, so did my sister, and it's how we communicated with our family and friends and everyone. I would speak English a lot to my mum, but then she spoke fluent Dutch as well. She had a job in a Dutch company where she wouldn't really work through English at all. So English was sort of the language that we used sometimes at home, enough to, and I think my mom in the first few years like very consciously like practiced it a lot with us to make sure that we knew how to write it and read it, and kind of heard it a lot around us. I think it took me a few years to get to full fluency with English when I was growing up. My sister's approach was to refuse to say a word in English until she was about 8. And then she sort of opened her mouth once and she was completely like, accentless fluent. So she'd sort of been absorbing it quietly for years, not really letting anything on. But it was all there. I think I'd been a bit more outgoing with speaking and making some mistakes and having a bit of a Dutch accent, but like slowly it slowly grew a bit more noticeably in me. But it was the big test for it always was we'd go on to Ireland every summer on holidays to visit the family and do all the regular visits that I'm sure a lot of families who have relatives where part of their family lives abroad, they'll recognize that process of every summer going to the same places and doing the family visits, the visits to the grandparents, etc. And that's always when suddenly we'd be like, oh yeah, okay, this is where it's sort of all the English register sort of kicks into action, and we got a lot of practice switching between the two. But English was very much a language that we only really used at home.
That's very interesting about your sister. Actually, I think everybody takes it and processes it differently, isn't it? And at your own pace. I'm wondering if you could talk to a parent who's currently raising their children multilingually, is there anything you would say to them?
I don't have kids, so I can't really give any advice on parenting. But what I would say is, I would say stick with it. Like, absolutely do it. I consider it one of the biggest gifts that I've ever been given. I feel slightly guilty about it sometimes, that it sort of basically came to me for free. It's this thing that you don't really, it's this enormous advantage in life, I think. And it takes a bit of work, I'm sure, as a parent to stay consistent with it. I'm sure it's frustrating both for yourself and as kids, but I've come across a fair number of people over the course of the years who grew up in households where the parents had different language backgrounds, and for whatever reason, the other parent decided not to impart their native language to their child. And it's tied up in a lot of reasons of identity as well, I think, and socio-cultural reasons. But everyone I've spoken to who grew up in a situation like that and didn't learn the other parent's native language was really frustrated later on. I think especially if it's a language that from a Western European perspective is harder to learn, like Arabic, Turkish, Chinese, Russian. It's just, I think the advantage of even teaching your child even a little bit of it, even in an imperfect way, but giving them sort of like, enough of a springboard to start with, so that if they have that interest, or if they develop that interest and they want to take it to the next level, or they want to move there, I think it's an enormous gift. I know people who grew up in the States, for example, and would have parents from, the one person I can think of is Polish. Her whole family was Polish, and she developed this routine of going to spend her entire summers in Poland, and it allowed her to speak with her grandmother, and it's become a huge part of her life. And similarly for me, I think I'm not sure I would have necessarily felt drawn to Ireland if I didn't have this. The interest in it had always been kept warm, and I felt like I'd really been given the tools to immediately move there and grasp the culture, and not just English fluency, but English the way it's spoken here. To have the right sort of expressions, it still gives me kind of a kick when I realize that some phrase that was really normal when I was growing up turns out to be a very regional thing from Mayo, where my mother's family is from. And I really feel like it's a piece of the puzzle in your own identity and your own background that you get. It's a very long way of saying to any parent, I would say absolutely it pays off. It will probably pay off in ways that you can't even foresee right now yet. It might take years to manifest, but it's the kind of thing I think that if that almost anyone who's been through it looks back on and thinks that it's a wonderful thing that has happened to them, that they were given this huge extra bit of knowledge, and at an age where you don't really consciously learn it either so much, you kind of just absorb it like a sponge. I think it's a fantastic thing to offer your kids.
Thank you so much, Finn. It was a pleasure to talk to you today. Thank you for
It was
chatting to
the
us.
pleasure is all mine. Thank you.